The last person to see Rebecca Thornton alive was her coworker, Ellen Morrison. And for weeks afterward, maybe longer, Ellen would find herself replaying those final moments in her head night after night, searching for anything she might have missed. It was a Tuesday evening in March 2023. Rain was coming down hard, slamming against the tall windows of the Dover Municipal Library with the kind of sharp intensity only early spring storms seem to bring. Inside, Rebecca was shelving returned books in the history section. Her movements were careful and practiced, the kind of quiet rhythm you develop after 14 years of doing the same thing in the same place. Ellen remembers calling out goodnight at exactly 8:32. She remembers how Rebecca turned, offered a soft, tired smile, that look people give when they're ready to go home. That subtle moment stayed with her. Ellen also recalls thinking Rebecca looked a little thinner than usual. She wondered, just briefly, if everything was okay at home with Graham. But she didn't ask. Because that's how it works in a small New Hampshire town. You notice things, but you often keep them to yourself. If you're watching from Dover, or if you've ever known that cold, sinking feeling when someone you love doesn't come home, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Because stories like this need witnesses. The library's security cameras recorded Rebecca locking the heavy front doors at 8:47 p.m. She had on her blue raincoat, already soaked by the storm, and her canvas work bag rested over one shoulder. The footage is a little grainy, but it's still clear enough to show her pausing under the entryway awning. She looked out toward the parking lot, where her 2019 silver Honda Civic sat parked beneath the glow of yellowish streetlights. She took a breath and stepped into the rain. Then she walked out of frame. That was the last digital image ever captured of her. The security camera angle didn't cover the parking lot itself, a limitation tied to budget decisions that would haunt the Dover Police Department for months to come. What happened in those next few minutes, in that short walk from the library doors to her car, remains a mystery. Somewhere in that small stretch of space, Rebecca Thornton simply vanished. Her husband, Graham Thornton, woke up Wednesday morning at 6:15 and immediately noticed something was wrong. Rebecca's side of the bed was still made, untouched. At first, he wasn't alarmed. Rebecca occasionally stayed late visiting her mom or catching up during their usual Tuesday dinners. But when he called her phone, it went straight to voicemail. He dialed Patricia Thornton, Rebecca's 67-year-old mother, who answered quickly. "No, dear," she said, sounding surprised. "I haven't seen Rebecca since Sunday." That's when the panic started to rise. Graham would later describe the feeling to Detective Carl Henderson as though someone had packed his chest full of ice. At 7 a.m., the Dover Police Department received a formal missing person report. Officer Marjorie Phillips, who knew Rebecca from their community book club, took the call herself. Her stomach dropped. By 8:30 a.m., they had located the silver Honda Civic still parked at the library. It was facing the building. The doors were locked. Inside, they found Rebecca's work bag on the passenger seat. Her car keys were inside the bag, not in the ignition. Also inside were her wallet, library ID, $43 in cash, and 2 credit cards. The gas tank was 3/4 full. There was no sign of a struggle. No note. Nothing that explained where she might have gone. It looked like she had stepped away from the car for just a moment, planning to come right back, and simply never did. Detective Carl Henderson arrived at 9:45, a 28-year veteran. Henderson had the kind of face that stayed neutral, no matter what. But behind his calm expression, his mind was already calculating everything. The rain had stopped by then, but the ground was still soaked, holding on to the storm from the night before. He stood in the exact spot where Rebecca had last appeared on camera, then slowly turned and looked toward the car. 48 feet away. 12 seconds of walking at her normal pace. Somewhere in that short stretch, between door and car, between seen and unseen, Rebecca had disappeared. She had gone from being a person to being a question. The search began before noon. Like many missing person cases, the early hours were a mix of urgency and chaos. Dover's entire force, just 11 officers, joined the effort. Chief Thomas Bradford contacted nearby towns, Rochester, Somersworth, Portsmouth, requesting support. By 1 p.m., volunteer firefighters from 3 counties were gathered outside the library, their safety vests standing out against the cloudy afternoon sky. 2 state K-9 units arrived with cadaver dogs. Their handlers looked experienced. Too experienced. The dogs were given a scent article, a cream cardigan Graham had brought from home. It still carried her perfume, a soft floral scent Graham couldn't name but would always recognize. Search teams spread out from the library in careful patterns. 8 to 10 people in each group, fanning through downtown Dover with steady focus. Dover may be home to over 30,000 people, but its downtown still holds the charm of an older time, brick buildings from the 1800s, narrow lanes, and the Cochecho River cutting right through the center. It's a peaceful place. But on that day, something was different. And somewhere in that quiet stillness, Rebecca Thornton was gone. Search teams moved steadily along Central Avenue, branching out into surrounding areas with quiet urgency. They combed through the small park behind the Dover Municipal Library, a place where unhoused individuals sometimes sought shelter. Then they followed the Riverside walking trail where early morning joggers had reported seeing nothing unusual. There were no personal belongings, no signs of distress, just empty paths and wet leaves. Inside the library's community room, now repurposed as a temporary command center, Detective Maya Sullivan coordinated the grid system from a folding table. Freshly transferred from Manchester and still learning the layout of Dover, she adapted quickly. At 34, she was sharp, focused, known for her meticulous approach to detail. In Manchester, that obsession with precision had helped her close 3 cold cases in under 2 years. People whispered about her instincts. She listened more than she spoke. It was Sullivan who reviewed the K-9 reports closely. The dogs had followed Rebecca's scent until it abruptly disappeared about 60 feet from her parked car. The spot was at the southeastern corner of the lot, where the pavement met a narrow alley behind the library. The dogs began circling, then whining, a behavior their handlers recognized. The scent trail hadn't faded gradually. It had stopped suddenly, cleanly. This kind of cutoff usually meant only one thing: vehicle involvement. Someone had likely picked Rebecca up or forced her into a car, but there were no tire marks worth casting. No fresh oil stains or leaked fluids to indicate a vehicle had idled there. The heavy rain from Tuesday night had washed away anything microscopic that might have been left behind. Detective Henderson stood at the spot for nearly 20 minutes, silently processing. He smoked 3 cigarettes, one after another, trying to visualize every possible version of what could have happened in those lost seconds. By Thursday afternoon, the search had grown far beyond Dover's borders. More than 200 volunteers joined in, friends, strangers, neighbors, fanning out into the wooded regions north of downtown. It's where the city's organized layout gives way to wild New Hampshire forest, thick with white pine and oak. The ground there was still partially frozen, coated with layers of decomposing leaves. Streams swollen from melting snow ran cold and fast, carving shallow channels through the woods. Volunteers called out Rebecca's name, over and over until their voices cracked from repetition. Their words echoed through the trees, swallowed by the dense silence of the forest. Search teams slogged through Garrison Creek, checked old drainage culverts, abandoned hunting cabins, any place large enough to hide someone or something. The state police sent up a helicopter equipped with thermal imaging, scanning for heat signatures from the air. But there was nothing. Not a single trace. Graham Thornton didn't rest. He spent both days walking, searching, speaking with anyone who would listen. He survived on bad coffee and the raw energy that comes when answers are out of reach. He joined search groups himself, distributed flyers with Rebecca's photo, a candid from last Christmas, showing her genuine smile and the small front tooth gap that made it unforgettable. He handed them to every shop owner along Central Avenue and Washington Street, asking the same quiet question, "Have you seen her?" At home on Locust Street, Patricia Thornton, Rebecca's mother, set up her own command post. She took phone calls, organized volunteers, and arranged meal deliveries for searchers. Her hands trembled constantly, but her voice never wavered. That particular kind of strength only mothers seem to summon, even when their child is 39 years old and missing without a trace. On Thursday, Detective Sullivan sat down with Ellen Morrison for a second, more detailed interview. They spoke for 3 hours, retracing the events of Tuesday night minute by minute. Ellen described Rebecca's mood as normal, maybe slightly distracted, but not noticeably upset. She did mention something new. Rebecca had been on her phone more lately, texting during lunch breaks, stepping outside for private calls. When asked if she'd ever asked about it, Ellen hesitated. She admitted she'd assumed it was a personal issue, maybe trouble at home. That quiet intuition that coworkers develop over years. "You notice, but you don't pry," Detective Sullivan wrote in tight, organized handwriting, underlining phrases, circling details. Already, she was mentally assembling the shape of something larger, building the framework of an investigation that, eventually, would split wide open. Inside it was something no one had expected. A hidden truth. That truth began to emerge Friday afternoon, when Sullivan obtained a search warrant for Rebecca's phone records. The phone itself was still missing, possibly with Rebecca or with whoever had taken her. But digital records don't vanish so easily. Cell providers track every text, every call, every login. What those records revealed would shift the investigation entirely. What had seemed like a standard missing person case turned out to be something far more complicated, something deeply personal. It turned out that Rebecca had been leading 2 lives, and the space between those lives was wider than the Cochecho River that divided the town. The first major discovery was a dating app called Discreet Connections. It was designed for married individuals seeking companionship outside their relationships. Rebecca had created a profile 6 months earlier, in September 2022. Her photos were carefully chosen, partial angles, soft lighting, nothing fully revealing. Her username was Bookish Brunette 603, the 603 referencing New Hampshire's area code. The bio read, "Looking for intelligent conversation and occasional company from someone who understands complexity." Detective Sullivan read the words aloud in the sterile conference room at Dover PD, and for a moment, she felt a quiet kind of sadness, the kind that comes from seeing someone's private hopes laid bare under the sharp glare of fluorescent lights. The data showed communication with 7 different men over a 6-month period. Some messages were casual and tentative. Others became more personal. 3 of those men had met Rebecca in person. Detectives began cross-referencing names and phone numbers, identifying addresses, and preparing to track down people who now had every reason to avoid police contact. That evening, just before sunset, Detective Henderson sat across from Graham Thornton at the kitchen table. It was time to tell him what they'd found. Detectives sat down with Graham Thornton in the modest living room of their home on Silver Street and explained what the investigation had uncovered so far. As the truth unfolded, Graham's face shifted through a slow, painful sequence: confusion, disbelief, frustration, and finally, a quiet, hollow resignation. It was the look of someone who, on some level, already suspected things weren't right, but had tried to avoid giving it a name. He admitted to feeling that distance growing between them over time, not in sudden arguments or loud confrontations, but in smaller ways. Like a slow leak that quietly drained the intimacy from their marriage year after year, Graham spoke openly. He told detectives their relationship had been on shaky ground for nearly 2 years, ever since they lost their baby. Rebecca had miscarried at 17 weeks, a loss that broke them both in different ways. But instead of grieving together, they drifted apart. Graham described how their conversations had grown short, more about bills and logistics than connection or affection. He said they'd started functioning more like roommates than husband and wife, partners in routine. Not in hard doubt Rebecca had suggested counseling last year, hoping they could reconnect. But Graham had brushed it off, convinced they could work things out on their own. Now, sitting across from 2 detectives, that decision felt like a painful regret. His voice cracked as he admitted he couldn't remember the last time he'd looked his wife in the eyes and asked, "Are you happy?" and really waited for her answer. When detectives informed Patricia Thornton, Rebecca's mother, her reaction was immediate and deeply maternal. She sat at her kitchen table on Locust Street, shaking her head slowly, refusing to accept what she was hearing. There was a certain certainty in her voice, the kind only mothers carry, that simply couldn't accept the idea that her daughter had secrets. Her Rebecca was kind, faithful, a woman who volunteered at the church food pantry, who organized children's reading programs at the library each summer, but Detective Sullivan, with quiet professionalism, showed her carefully chosen portions of the digital messages, just enough to make continued denial impossible. Patricia's hands trembled as she read the words, the longing, the loneliness, the unmistakable need for connection. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she looked up at Sullivan and whispered, "I failed her." She blamed herself for not seeing the signs, for not creating the kind of relationship where her daughter could confide that kind of pain. Before seeking comfort elsewhere, the emotional revelation altered the course of the investigation. What had previously looked like a random disappearance now pointed toward a potential connection to Rebecca's private romantic life. The 3 men she had met in person through the dating app were elevated to immediate persons of interest. Each of them now had to be interviewed. Their backgrounds would need a thorough check. Their whereabouts on Tuesday night needed to be confirmed down to the minute dot by Sunday afternoon. Detectives had identified all 3 men. Travis Caldwell, age 41, a real estate agent based in Portsmouth. Marcus Chun, 37, an insurance adjuster living in Manchester. And Derek Vaughn, 44, a local mechanic who owned a small auto repair shop on Route 9. Just outside downtown Dover, the interrogation room at the Dover Police Department is small, windowless, and painted a bland beige, a color that seems intentionally chosen to strip away warmth and ease. Detective Henderson had conducted hundreds of interviews in that very room across nearly 3 decades. He'd learned to read everything: the twitch of a mouth, the pause in a sentence, the shift in tone. Truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it slips through in the quietest moments. Travis Caldwell came in voluntarily on Monday morning, accompanied by his attorney. He claimed he had nothing to hide. He was confident, well-groomed, the kind of polished charm that comes naturally to someone in sales. His suit was sharp, his handshake firm, his smile controlled. He admitted to meeting Rebecca twice, both times at the Hampton Inn in Portsmouth. Yes, their relationship had turned physical. But he also described her as intelligent and emotionally raw, someone who touched something deeper in him. He claimed she'd confided about feeling invisible in her marriage, stuck in a version of life that didn't reflect who she was inside. Caldwell's alibi for Tuesday night checked out completely. He had been showing a waterfront property to clients from Massachusetts until just after 7 p.m., then attended a real estate dinner at the Portsmouth Country Club that ran until nearly 11. Over 24 people confirmed seeing him, including the evening's keynote speaker, who had a detailed conversation with him about coastal housing trends. Detective Sullivan personally verified all of it. She called witnesses, reviewed guest lists, and pulled security footage that captured Caldwell arriving and leaving the event. His timeline was airtight. He also seemed genuinely affected by the news of Rebecca's disappearance, even pausing during the interview to compose himself. He told detectives they hadn't been intimate during their last meeting, that she had broken down crying, and he'd simply held her. He said it didn't feel right to take advantage of someone in that much pain. Marcus Chen, the second man, was quieter. When detectives arrived at his Manchester apartment on Tuesday, he welcomed them in with visible hesitation. He was calm, reserved, someone who thought carefully before speaking. He lived alone in a modest apartment near Elm Street, worked for a regional insurance company, and spent most of his evenings reading or playing chess online. Chun told detectives he had met Rebecca 3 times over a span of 4 months. Always at a discreet motel off I-93 called the Birchwood Inn. Their meetings, he said, were more emotional than physical, long conversations filled with philosophical questions and gentle silences. Rebecca, he said, seemed to be searching for meaning, for reassurance that her life mattered in ways no one else saw. Chun's alibi was thinner. He'd been home alone Tuesday night. His only evidence, a Thai takeout order at 7:45 p.m., receipt and delivery timestamp included. No human witnesses. Detective Henderson pressed him hard on the details. Looked for cracks in the timeline. But Chun's story held up. His tone never shifted. His answers never changed. Then there was Derek Vaughn. From the moment detectives approached his shop, a squat, cinder-block building off Route 9, things felt different. The air smelled like oil and rust. Old tires. Vaughn stood 6'3", broad-shouldered, his face weathered from years of cold winters and outdoor labor. His hands were thick and stained, the kind of grease that doesn't wash off. He was far less cooperative. His answers came short, clipped, with eyes that didn't linger. Yes, he'd met Rebecca. Yes, they'd been intimate twice at a rundown motor lodge off the Spalding Turnpike. No, he didn't want to get into the details. No, he didn't like being treated like a suspect. When asked where he was Tuesday night, Vaughn claimed he'd been working late at the shop, fixing an engine on a Ford F-150. He left sometime around 9:30, maybe later. He wasn't sure. He lived alone, in a small house on 6th Street, and no one could confirm his story. Derek. Vaughn told detectives he'd gone straight home after work, but there was no one who could confirm that timeline. When Detective Sullivan asked if his shop had any security cameras, Vaughn shook his head. He said no, said he'd never needed them. Sighed Dover wasn't the kind of place where you had to worry about theft or vandalism. Detective Henderson followed up, asking if any customers or nearby businesses might have seen him working late. Vaughn's jaw tightened. He hesitated. Sighed maybe. Said people came and went, but he didn't pay close attention. Said he didn't remember seeing anyone. The detectives took note of the inconsistencies. Noted his vague answers. Noted the way his body shifted in the chair, his arms crossed defensively. Noted how his eyes struggled to hold contact, flicking away after just a few seconds. Then they pulled his phone records. What they found raised new questions. Vaughn had called Rebecca's phone 3 times on Tuesday night, once at 7:52 p.m., again at 8:16, and one last time at 8:39 p.m., All 3 calls were short, less than 30 seconds each. That suggested they had gone to voicemail. No conversations. Just rings. Then silence. When confronted, Vaughn admitted to making the calls. He said Rebecca had texted him earlier that day. Said she'd hinted at maybe meeting up that evening, but then she'd stopped responding. He claimed he was just trying to follow up. Tried 3 times. After that, he said, he gave up and went back to working on the truck. Detective Henderson asked why he hadn't mentioned the calls before. Vaughn looked down. Sighed he didn't think it was important. Sighed he didn't want to complicate things. Said he didn't feel comfortable sharing his private life with strangers. It was a plausible explanation, but just barely. The kind of half-truth that sounds honest enough until you start looking closer. The kind people give when they're not ready to share what really matters. By June, the investigation had reached a painful plateau. The frantic urgency of March had long since faded. Tips slowed to a trickle. Searches became more targeted, smaller, quieter, and almost always led nowhere. Detective Henderson's case file on Rebecca Thornton had grown to 473 pages, filled with interviews, forensic details, phone data, maps, timelines, and dozens of dead ends. Gone were the canine units, the helicopters, the hundreds of volunteers. Now the search relied on occasional leads. A hiker thought they'd seen a piece of clothing near Bellamy River. A gas station clerk in Rochester remembered a woman who looked familiar. But each sighting evaporated under scrutiny. Details didn't line up, faces didn't match, time frames unraveled. Faced with limited resources and mounting caseloads, Dover PD had no choice but to scale back. The original 4-person investigative team was first reduced to 2 detectives, then to just Henderson, with Sullivan assisting only when her other cases allowed. Despite everything, Derek Vaughn remained the strongest lead. But interest without evidence is just suspicion, and suspicion alone doesn't warrant a warrant. His timeline for March 21st was flimsy but not impossible. His attitude guarded, yes, but not a confession. Detective Henderson interviewed Vaughn 4 more times between April and May. Each meeting grew more tense, more repetitive. They circled the same events over and over, never breaking new ground. Eventually, Vaughn's lawyer, Catherine Morris, a well-respected defense attorney out of Portsmouth, stepped in. She told Henderson bluntly, "Either charge my client or stop harassing him." And without physical evidence, without a body, without a single eyewitness or piece of surveillance, Henderson had no legal grounds to move forward. He backed off. But that didn't mean he gave up. He continued driving past Vaughn's auto shop 3, sometimes 4 times a week, watching, waiting, hoping for a mistake, anything that might unlock the truth. Meanwhile, Graham Thornton moved through the summer like a shadow of himself. He'd taken extended leave from his teaching job at Dover High School. Couldn't bring himself to stand in front of a classroom, smiling and grading essays, while his wife's fate remained unresolved. His days were spent managing the missing person social media accounts Patricia had created. He responded to every message, no matter how strange. Some were from self-proclaimed psychics with visions. Others claimed to have inside information. Every one of them led nowhere. The house on Silver Street had become both too large and too small. Every room felt full of memories, yet empty of meaning. Graham no longer felt angry about Rebecca's secret life. Not when she might be gone. Not when the last meaningful conversation they had was about who would take the recycling out. Patricia. Thornton tried to keep momentum alive. She organized monthly vigils in the library parking lot. On the 21st of each month, a small crowd would gather, usually between 20 and 30 people. They held candles in the darkness, shared stories about Rebecca, and stood in quiet solidarity. Their presence was a way of holding space for her, a way of saying, "We haven't forgotten." Grief changed Patricia. Her face looked older, her posture a little heavier. Her eyes carried the deep, weary exhaustion of someone living in limbo, not knowing whether to hope or mourn. She became a familiar presence at the police department, brought cookies, coffee, called Henderson twice a week for updates. As if some act of kindness might somehow bring her daughter home faster, and Henderson always answered. Never brushed her off. He understood. Those phone calls, those updates, were the only things keeping her grounded in something resembling hope. The media, which had swarmed the case in March, had mostly moved on by summer. Rebecca's story was now reduced to small follow-ups in the Foster's Daily Democrat, or short 90-second segments on local Portsmouth news. What had once been front-page material now felt like fading background noise. Her case was becoming what every missing person's family fears most: yesterday's tragedy. Detective Henderson knew it. He could feel it in the silence. But he refused to let the case die quietly. He kept a photo of Rebecca on his desk. The one from Christmas, the one with her smiling, a glimmer of mischief in her eyes and that tiny gap in her front teeth. Each morning, before starting his shift, he looked at it. A silent reminder. A quiet promise. He'd told Graham and Patricia both. He wouldn't give up. He'd work this case until the truth came out, or until he retired trying. It was the kind of promise cops make more with heart than certainty. A vow spoken out loud not because it's easy to keep, but because some stories demand that someone keeps trying. No matter how long it takes, because sometimes the promise itself is the only thing left to hold on to. By late July, Detective Henderson had conducted more than 60 interviews. He spoke with people who'd known Rebecca over the years, library patrons, book club members, neighbors, even co-workers from her old job at Barnes & Noble in Portsmouth. A portrait slowly began to form. She was remembered as warm, polite, approachable, someone who smiled easily but rarely shared much. Despite working in a public-facing role, Rebecca had always been intensely private. She listened more than she talked, asked questions, but offered few of her own answers. Several people mentioned a subtle shift in her over the past few months. She'd seemed distracted, often glancing at her phone during conversations, sometimes canceling plans last minute, which was unlike her. One neighbor, Walter Simmons, an elderly man who lived 2 doors down on Silver Street, recalled seeing Rebecca getting into a truck one evening in February. It wasn't a vehicle he recognized, but he couldn't remember the exact date, couldn't describe the make or model. Another detail added to the file, a fragment that might mean everything or nothing. Then, on October 19th, a Thursday afternoon, Dover Police Dispatch received a call at 1:47 p.m. outside. New Hampshire was at its peak autumn brilliance. The kind of day where every tree looked like it had been set on fire, bright red, deep gold, flickering orange. 2 brothers, Kyle and Brandon Hutchins, had been out hunting deer in the woods off 6th Street Extension. It's a rugged area where Dover's suburban edge ends suddenly, and dense forest takes over. They had been following a game trail nearly 2 miles from the nearest road when Favin, Brandon's hunting dog, a Labrador retriever trained for upland birds, suddenly froze. The dog whined, not with excitement, but distress, and refused to continue. Brandon called out commands, but the dog wouldn't budge. So Kyle walked ahead, hoping to spot whatever had startled it. That's when he found the shallow depression in the ground, a low, damp hollow where rain had pooled and drained again and again. The soil was soft, dark, disturbed. And there, inside the hollow, was something that would change everything. Kyle didn't fully register what he was seeing at first, but within seconds his mind caught up. partially skeletal, partially preserved. The remains were unmistakably human. The process of decomposition had been slowed by the forest's shifting temperature and moisture, creating an unsettling combination of preservation and decay. Animal activity had scattered some bones, but what remained was enough to freeze Kyle where he stood, enough to haunt him for the rest of his life. It would take 3 sessions with a department psychologist before Kyle could sleep without seeing it again. Clothing had survived better than flesh. A blue raincoat, torn and dirt-stained, draped over what was left of a white blouse and black pants. Kyle backed away, hands shaking. No phone signal. He and Brandon sprinted back to their truck and drove until they reached a stretch of road with reception. Then, with trembling fingers, they called 911. Detective Henderson arrived at the site by 3:30 p.m. Along with Detective Sullivan and a forensics team from the State Police Major Crime Unit. The scene was roped off with yellow police tape, tied between trees like a fragile barrier between silence and truth. Dr. Lawrence Chen, the medical examiner, was already crouched at the edge of the hollow. His hands moved with slow, deliberate care, the kind of reverence good forensic pathologists bring to scenes like this. Every motion quiet. Every word measured. Henderson stood nearby, staring at the blue raincoat. His chest tightened. He didn't need confirmation, not yet. He already knew in his gut. They'd found Rebecca Thornton. The location was roughly 12 miles from the library parking lot, far enough from public trails that no one would stumble across it, but reachable if you knew the old logging roads that cut through the trees. The kind of place someone would choose if they didn't want the body to be found quickly. The recovery effort took 7 hours. They worked into the night under harsh portable lights that turned trees into shadows. Every bone, every piece of fabric, every leaf was documented, photographed, bagged, and labeled. Dr. Chun was precise, gentle in the way he moved the raincoat, careful as he lifted soil from beneath the remains. It was quiet work, heavy work. He noted aloud for the record that the body hadn't been buried. It had been placed, covered with branches and leaves, but left near the surface. There were drag marks on the clothing, signs the body had been moved. And there were synthetic fibers embedded in the raincoat, brown, carpet-like fibers often used in cars and trucks. It was the first real piece of physical evidence in months. Detective Sullivan walked a wide perimeter around the site, scanning for overlooked clues. Roughly 50 yards from the hollow, she noticed a patch where vegetation looked trampled. Broken branches, flattened grass. A temporary parking spot, maybe. The team took soil samples and made casts of what faint tire tracks remained. The prints were degraded by rain and snow, but there was still a chance to identify the type of vehicle used. Sullivan stood in that clearing and pictured it. A cold March evening. Someone driving back here, maybe with headlights off, dragging a body through the trees. Not panicked, prepared. Someone strong. Someone who knew the area. Someone who wanted her to disappear. At 6:43 p.m., Graham Thornton received the call. He was sitting in his living room, the same room where detectives had first told him about Rebecca's secret life. Henderson's voice was gentle but direct. They had found human remains. They couldn't confirm anything yet, but he should prepare himself. Graham sat in stunned silence as the words sank in. He didn't cry at first. He just existed. The same way he'd been existing for months, suspended between being a husband and being something else entirely. He called Patricia next. They wept together over the phone. The kind of deep, guttural grief that only comes when uncertainty is replaced with terrible certainty. Days later, dental records provided the confirmation. Dr. Sarah Kimball, Rebecca's dentist of over a decade supplied the necessary X-rays. They matched, exactly. There was no doubt now. 7 months after she walked out of the Dover Municipal Library and into the rain, Rebecca Ann Thornton had finally been found. Into a rainy March night, Rebecca Thornton had vanished, stepping into the storm and slipping out of the visible world. But on October 23rd, that uncertainty came to an end. The official identification arrived, confirming that the remains found in the forest off 6th Street Extension did, in fact, belong to Rebecca. And with that confirmation, her case shifted from a missing person to a homicide investigation. Detective Henderson felt a grim sense of resolve settle over him. They finally had something solid, a fact that couldn't be debated, a starting point that might lead to answers. But that clarity was short-lived, because almost immediately, the forensic findings began to unravel any hope that this was going to be a straightforward case. This wasn't an impulsive crime. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was something more calculated, managed, concealed with a level of care that pointed to planning, or at the very least, a calm and deliberate response after the fact. The autopsy report from Dr. Lawrence Chun landed on Henderson's desk on October 30th. It was 47 pages long, a meticulous breakdown of what the human body can reveal translated into medical terminology. Inside those pages was the story of Rebecca's final moments. The cause of death: blunt force trauma to the skull. 3 distinct impact points were noted on the left side, the parietal and temporal bones. The pattern was consistent with being struck by a cylindrical object roughly 2 inches in diameter. Possibilities included a tire iron, a steel pipe, or a heavy-duty wrench. Based on the positioning of the wounds, Dr. Chun believed Rebecca had been facing her attacker when the first blow struck, then either turned or collapsed. Receiving the remaining blows while already on the ground. The estimated time of death was narrowed to between March 21st and March 23rd, calculated using decomposition stages, insect activity, and the known date of her disappearance. Manner of death: homicide, but it was what came next in the report that truly altered the investigation's course. Dr. Chun's secondary findings were based on environmental indicators, the condition of the remains, the surrounding soil, and the specific decomposition timeline. And they revealed something chilling. Rebecca's body hadn't been in that forest hollow for the full 7 months she'd been missing. The level of tissue preservation, combined with the soil chemistry and lack of certain insect colonization, strongly suggested her body had been stored somewhere else for at least 2 to 4 weeks post-mortem in a cool, dry environment. Only then had she been moved into the woods. The realization hit Henderson hard. Whoever had done this hadn't just killed Rebecca. They had hidden her. For weeks, while her family grieved and volunteers searched, her body had been stashed away out of sight. And only after the public pressure had eased did someone drive her out to the woods and leave her there. Then came the next development, something small but significant. During the examination of Rebecca's clothing, forensic technicians recovered multiple fibers embedded in the blue raincoat. Synthetic carpet fibers, brown in color. Dr. Chun flagged them for further testing, and they were sent to the State Police Forensic Lab in Concord. The analysis was led by Dr. Patricia Walsh, a meticulous crime lab technician with over 40 court testimonies to her name. She identified the fibers as automotive trunk carpet manufactured by a company called Auto Interior Solutions. This specific fiber, brown with gray flecks, had only been used in a limited set of domestic vehicles. Mainly between 2012 and 2018. Dr. Walsh compiled a list of 17 vehicle makes and models known to use this exact carpet type. Detective Sullivan cross-referenced the list with DMV records for all persons of interest in the case. Travis Caldwell drove a 2021 Audi. Marcus Chun had a 2019 Toyota Camry. Derek Vaughn, however, owned a 2015 Ford F250, and that particular year and model matched the carpet style found on Rebecca's raincoat. Sullivan's pulse picked up. It was the first potential match. She dug further, pulling Vaughn's full vehicle, registration history, and that's when she found something even more intriguing, in addition to his personal pickup truck. Vaughn Auto Repair owned 3 other vehicles under the business name, a tow truck, a mobile service van, and a 2014 Chevrolet Impala. The Impala had been listed as a customer loaner vehicle. It, too, matched the fiber specifications. On November 2nd, Sullivan and Henderson visited Vaughn Auto Repair on Route 9, framing their stop as a routine welfare check, really just an excuse to observe the property and inventory the vehicles. Business looked normal. Customers were coming and going, but neither the F250 nor the Impala were anywhere in sight. They asked about the loaner car. Vaughn wasn't available, but his office manager, Tracy Bellows, told them it had been sold months ago, back in May. She produced a bill of sale. According to the document, the Impala had been purchased by a man named Michael Torres from Lawrence, Massachusetts. Sale price, $15. Detective Henderson raised an eyebrow. $15 was suspiciously low for any functioning vehicle, even an older one. That car, in reasonable condition, should have fetched at least $4,000 to $5,000. Sullivan ran the name and address through every available system. Nothing. No registered driver named Michael Torres in Lawrence. No vehicle transfer logged. No insurance record. No DMV update. The VIN number on the bill of sale did match the Impala, but officially, the car had vanished after the transaction, which left 2 possibilities. Either the vehicle was now being driven off the grid, or the entire sale had been faked and the car quietly destroyed. Henderson stood in the parking lot of Vaughn Auto Repair, staring at the building's faded cinder block walls, the peeling paint, the clutter of cars in various states of disrepair. He watched Derek Vaughn through the open bay door, bent over a Honda Accord on a hydraulic lift. The mechanic moved with practiced precision, the kind that comes from decades of turning wrenches, from understanding how things fit together and how they break apart. And Henderson thought about it all. The fibers, the vanishing Impala, the oddly timed vehicle sale, the phone calls Vaughn had made the night Rebecca disappeared, the way her body had been stored somewhere cool, hidden from the search teams, then dumped in the woods. He thought about garages with quiet back rooms, with storage areas no one asks about. He thought about tire irons and pipe wrenches, about vehicles with spacious trunks, easily cleaned, easily stripped. The pieces were beginning to take shape, a puzzle slowly assembling itself. But even with so much in front of them, one thing was still missing, the one piece that would turn suspicion into proof. Turning suspicion into prosecutable evidence is rarely clean. But sometimes it starts with one decision, a decision born out of persistence, instinct, or a refusal to let a cold case go quiet. On November 7th, during a quiet review session in the conference room at Dover PD, Detective Sullivan proposed an idea. She'd been poring over the forensic reports late into the night, revisiting the smallest details again and again. And she kept coming back to one thing that still hadn't turned up. Rebecca's cell phone. The device had been active until around 9:15 p.m. on March 21st. Then, suddenly, it went dark. Powered off. Or destroyed. Either way, it had vanished. No trace. No location ping. No further communication. Sullivan proposed that the killer might have disposed of it near where he eventually left Rebecca's body, and that, even after months of exposure to weather and forest conditions, the phone might still be out there. Still traceable. Still detectable. Henderson was skeptical. But he'd been in this job long enough to know that breakthroughs don't usually come from the obvious. They come from paying attention to the detail that everyone else dismissed. So he signed off on the search on November 9th. A small team assembled at the recovery site, 2 officers from the state police, both trained in evidence recovery, each carrying high-grade metal detectors capable of differentiating between types of metallic signatures. The search began at the hollow where Rebecca's remains had been found and worked outward in precise 20-foot grid increments. Each section was flagged with bright markers documenting every square foot. Progress was slow. Most of what turned up was exactly what you'd expect in a stretch of woods frequented by people. Aluminum cans, shotgun shells, rusted bike parts, pieces of the forest's untidy history. Hours passed. Then, sometime just after noon, one of the officers, Garrett Phillips, picked up a strong signal in a small open clearing, roughly 215 feet northeast of where Rebecca had been found. The canopy above had thinned, sunlight reaching the forest floor in scattered patches. Phillips dropped to his knees, brushing away layers of decomposing leaves. 6 inches down, his gloved hand struck something hard and rectangular, wrapped in a crumpled plastic shopping bag. He called over his partner. Together, they carefully unearthed the object, aware that even the smallest mistake could damage potential evidence. Inside the plastic, nestled in the soil, was a rose gold iPhone. It matched exactly the description that Graham Thornton had given detectives months earlier. Rebecca's phone. Despite the time it had spent underground, it appeared remarkably well preserved. The plastic bag had kept out most of the moisture. The phone's outer case was intact, the buttons still in place. Phillips immediately secured it in an evidence bag and radioed Henderson, back at the station. Henderson had been reviewing traffic camera footage for what felt like the 100th time, looking for anything along Route 9 that could have been missed. When the call came in, he left immediately. The phone was more than just a personal belonging. It was a miracle, a piece of physical evidence that might hold the final pieces of the story. The kind of development detectives wait their entire careers to see. Henderson transported it himself to the state's digital forensics lab in Concord. There, it was handed over to James Wu, a technician known for his skill with water-damaged devices. Wu explained that while environmental exposure could have affected the internal components, the bag, the case, and the relatively dry burial site gave him real hope. Still, it wouldn't be fast. Data extraction was a delicate process, and success wasn't guaranteed. It could take days, possibly longer. The waiting was difficult. Henderson couldn't sleep. He found it hard to focus on other cases, because in that phone, in its texts, call logs, photos, and locations could be the final link between Rebecca Thornton and whoever had taken her life. On November 14th, Wu called. He had news. Using specialized equipment to bypass the damaged battery he'd powered the device on. He had successfully cloned its storage before attempting any direct navigation, a standard protocol that preserved the data without risking corruption. The phone's last location ping? Captured at 9:12 p.m. on March 21st. Route 9, near the intersection with 6th Street Extension. Just a quarter mile from Vaughn Auto Repair. Sullivan stared at the Google Maps satellite image. Everything lined up. Rebecca's phone had been in or near Derek Vaughn's shop that night, the same night Vaughn claimed he was working late, alone, and had been trying to reach her. But Wu noticed something. There were no incoming calls from Vaughn's number logged during that critical time window. Instead, What the phone showed was chilling. A single text message sent from Rebecca's device at 9:07 p.m. The message had never been delivered. It had gone out after her death. It read simply, "On my way. Give me 20 minutes." The recipient was Derek Vaughn. Wu confirmed it quickly. It was his number. Henderson read that line over and over again. Each time, the pieces came closer together. Rebecca had gone to meet Vaughn that Tuesday night. She'd left the library, likely driven straight to the shop. She must have parked out of view, no camera footage, no witnesses. Somewhere inside that garage, something had gone wrong. Whether it was an argument or something else, no one knew yet. But Vaughn had killed her. Probably not with intent. But the injury was fatal, a blow to the skull, followed by panic. He'd kept her body hidden. Maybe in a bay, maybe in a storage room. Anywhere cold and quiet. Then, using her phone, he tried to create a trail. He sent a message to himself, pretending she was still alive, still en route. But he didn't realize her old number had been disconnected. The message failed. And that failure became proof. Afterward, he drove out into the woods. Dumped the phone near the spot where he'd later place her body. Assumed it would never be found. That time and weather would erase everything. But it hadn't, because someone had kept asking the right questions. The phone held more. James Wu recovered fragments of deleted images, partial files and thumbnails tucked deep within the phone's cache. The kinds of digital ghosts that linger even after. Deletion. Wu reconstructed them one by one, and what they revealed would finally complete the story. Some of the recovered photos were fragmented, corrupted. Data stitched together piece by piece, but a few remained hauntingly intact. Several images showed what looked like the inside of a garage. Bare concrete floors. Tool benches cluttered with equipment. Vehicles suspended on hydraulic lifts under the glow of fluorescent lights. There was no question where these photos had been taken. One stood out more than the rest. Dated just 3 weeks before Rebecca's disappearance, it captured Derek Vaughn leaning casually against a blue Ford pickup. His arms were crossed. A slight smile touched his face. It wasn't a posed photo. It felt spontaneous, like a moment Rebecca had wanted to capture quietly, just for herself. The metadata confirmed it. The image had been taken inside Vaughn Auto Repair. This wasn't just a coincidence. It was evidence. Rebecca had been documenting her interactions, preserving moments, maybe without even realizing their future significance. Through her phone, she had left behind a digital record of a life no one else knew she was living, a secret history that now told investigators far more than anyone had expected. Henderson stared at that photo for a long time. And in it, he saw the case shift, the way ice suddenly fractures under pressure. What had once been suspicion now felt unshakably real. On December 4th at 6 a.m., Judge Margaret Brennan signed the arrest warrant. It followed a closed-door hearing that lasted over 90 minutes. Detective Henderson presented every detail. The forensic results, the recovered phone, the photos, the message Vaughn had unknowingly sent, the warrant-authorized charges of second-degree murder, evidence tampering, and abuse of a corpse. Henderson didn't take any chances. Despite Vaughn's clean criminal record, no arrests. No prior incidents of violence. They knew desperation could make people unpredictable. A man who had quietly hidden the body for weeks could be capable of anything. By 7 a.m., a tactical team was in place. 6 unmarked cruisers surrounded Vaughn Auto Repair from both sides, sealing off every possible exit. The shop had just opened for the day. Inside the main service bay, Vaughn was bent over a Subaru Outback, tools spread out neatly around him. When the first car door slammed shut, he looked up. 6 officers approached, weapons drawn. For a split second, Henderson thought he might try to run. But instead, Vaughn froze. He was holding a socket wrench. His eyes darted across the lot, from the cruisers to the officers, then back to Henderson. And then his expression shifted. First confusion, then understanding, and finally something like resignation. He slowly set the wrench down on the tool cart, raised his hands, and said nothing. No protest, no denial. He let the officers cuff him, listened silently as his rights were read, and as they led him toward the car, he looked at Henderson, not with fear, but with acknowledgement. The kind that says, "You figured it out." Vaughn was transported to the Dover Police Department in the back seat of Henderson's unmarked sedan. The drive took just 7 minutes through the quiet morning traffic. Neither man spoke. At 9 a.m., the interrogation officially began. Vaughn's attorney, Catherine Morris, had arrived earlier that morning. She was sharp, calm, and quick to grasp the gravity of the situation. It didn't take her long to understand what her client was facing. The physical evidence was overwhelming. The recovered phone, the text message, the photos, the carpet fibers, the timeline, it was airtight. Morris advised Vaughn to cooperate, not out of guilt, but strategy. The prosecution wasn't making any firm promises, but they were willing to consider cooperation during sentencing. Sometimes in cases like this, that was the best offer someone was going to get. So Vaughn agreed to talk. At 9:42 a.m., he sat down in interview room 2. Detectives Henderson and Sullivan were present. A camera in the corner began recording. The confession lasted 3 hours and 17 minutes. Vaughn spoke in a low, steady voice. No dramatics, no emotion, just words. He admitted that he and Rebecca had been involved. They met through a dating app. She reached out first. They had met in person a few times over the course of 2 months. He said they'd slept together twice. He described her as complicated, someone who felt unseen in her marriage, lonely, looking for connection. He said on Tuesday, March 21st, Rebecca messaged him suggesting they meet at his shop after she got off work from the library. He said yes. She arrived around 8:50 p.m., parked behind the building where her car couldn't be seen from Route 9. They talked in his office, a cramped space behind the main bay, filled with old paperwork and tool manuals. At first, the conversation was easy. But something shifted. According to Vaughn, she became emotional, accused him of using her. He said her words became sharp, unpredictable. He claimed he didn't know how it escalated so fast, that she slapped him across the face. Then, almost in a haze, he said he grabbed the nearest tool, a torque wrench, and swung it. He said he didn't mean to hit her, didn't mean to hurt her, just wanted to scare her. But the blow landed hard. She dropped instantly. He said he froze, stared at her on the floor, blood pooling beneath her head. He checked for a pulse and felt nothing. In that moment, he said, he knew she was gone. He sat there for a long time. Didn't move. Didn't speak. He didn't call for help. Instead, Vaughn said, he wrapped Rebecca's body in a tarp, moved her into a storage bay behind the shop, hid her behind a stack of tires, where no one would find her. He kept her there for 3 weeks, all while her husband searched, while her mother pleaded for answers on the evening news, while flyers went up, candles were lit, and volunteers walked the woods. He said he didn't know what to do, that he was terrified, that each passing day made it harder to come forward. So he planned. He said he waited until the search pressure eased, when news coverage shifted and investigators stopped calling so often. Then, one night, he took her body out into the woods, to a place he thought no one would ever find. Vaughn didn't cry during the confession. His voice only wavered once when describing the moment she fell. Henderson watched him closely, searching for signs of truth, of regret, of manipulation. And while he believed there was some real remorse, he also knew remorse doesn't change the outcome. Rebecca Thornton was gone, and no amount of explanation could undo that Vaughn had confessed. But the consequences were only beginning. Ust when detectives thought they'd uncovered the worst of it. Derek Vaughn's confession took a darker turn. He admitted he hadn't acted alone. The most damaging revelation came when he said his younger brother, Liam Vaughn, had helped him. Liam, a warehouse equipment operator living in Portsmouth, had known the truth since April. Derek had called him in the middle of the night, confessed everything, and instead of going to the police, Liam had gone to the auto shop. It was late. The streets were quiet, and under the cover of darkness, the two brothers carried out the most critical part of the cover-up. Together, they loaded Rebecca's body into Derek's truck. They drove out to a wooded area off 6th Street Extension, a hunting spot they'd both known since they were boys. There, in a hollow beneath a cluster of trees, they gently laid her down, covered her with branches and leaves, and returned to their lives. But that wasn't all Liam had helped with. He'd helped Derek create the fake bill of sale for the Impala the car investigators later realized Rebecca had been in. He helped strip the carpeting from the trunk and burn it to eliminate traces of blood. And eventually, he helped dismantle the entire vehicle and dispose of it at a scrapyard across the state line in Massachusetts, a place known for not asking questions. Detective Sullivan, seated quietly in the corner of the interview room, asked Derek why he'd kept Rebecca's phone. Why not destroy it, throw it in a river, or bury it immediately? Derek said he'd taken it from her body that same night. At first, he tried to erase everything: texts, photos, records of their conversations. Then, in a moment of panic and flawed logic, he sent a message from Rebecca's phone to his own. The idea, he claimed, was to confuse investigators, to make it seem like she was alive, on her way somewhere else, but the illusion didn't work. The message was never delivered, and Derek couldn't bring himself to completely destroy the device. He held on to it for weeks before burying it near her final resting place. When Henderson asked whether he felt remorse, Derek didn't hesitate. He looked directly into the interview room camera and said, "Every day. I see her face every time I close my eyes. I destroyed my life and hers." Whether that remorse was genuine or simply performed for the camera, for the record, was hard to say. But in the end, it didn't really matter. The confession was complete. The case was solved. And with Derek in custody, police moved quickly to bring in the second man involved. At the exact moment Derek was being transported to Dover Police Department, a second tactical team was preparing to breach Liam Vaughn's small apartment on Islington Street in Portsmouth. Liam, 38, lived alone in a cramped studio that smelled of cigarette smoke and leftover takeout. When officers arrived, he was getting ready for work. Unlike his brother, Liam didn't surrender quietly. He didn't resist physically, but verbally, he exploded. He shouted through the doorway that he hadn't done anything wrong, that he hadn't killed anyone, that he'd only helped family, and that you don't turn your back on blood. But the law didn't agree. Liam was handcuffed and transported to Dover, where he was formally charged with hindering apprehension, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. His bail was set at $200,000. Unable to pay, Liam remained at Strafford County Jail while awaiting trial. He was assigned a public defender, Robert Walsh, a seasoned attorney who'd seen more than his share of complicated family cases. Walsh tried to negotiate a deal. He argued that Liam hadn't committed the murder, hadn't planned it, and hadn't personally harmed Rebecca. But prosecutors weren't interested in leniency. Assistant Attorney General David Morrison led the case. He made it clear Liam's actions had directly interfered with the investigation. They had allowed critical evidence to be destroyed, and they had prolonged the suffering of Rebecca's loved ones. The prosecution's message was simple: if you help cover up a murder, you're part of it. Eventually, in late January, Liam took a plea deal. He agreed to testify against Derek in exchange for a reduced sentence recommendation, 8 to 15 years for his role in evidence tampering and abuse of a corpse. By the time Derek Vaughn's trial began in April 2024, much of it felt like a formality. His confession had removed any doubt. But still, his attorney, Catherine Morris, pushed for a lighter charge. She filed motions to have the murder charge reduced to manslaughter. She argued that Derek hadn't planned to kill Rebecca, that it was a split-second act triggered by emotion. A moment of passion, not premeditation. Morris described her client as a decent man who made a catastrophic mistake. She said he panicked and made every wrong decision afterward, but the prosecution saw it differently. They pointed to the fake bill of sale, the concealed phone, the attempt to create an alibi, the weeks of silence while her family searched. All of it showed a deliberate attempt to escape justice. David Morrison told the jury, even if the initial strike wasn't planned, everything that followed was. It was calculated. It was cold. And it was intended to mislead. In the gallery sat Graham and Patricia Thornton. They didn't speak to the press. They didn't cry publicly. But their grief was visible in every movement. Graham, once an outgoing professor known for his wit, had lost over 40 pounds. He'd gone back to teaching in January, but his colleagues said he wasn't the same. Quiet, withdrawn, like part of him had been taken. Patricia no longer hosted the monthly vigils. Once Rebecca's body was found, hope turned into mourning. She created a small memorial instead, a wooden bench under a dogwood tree in her backyard, with a plaque etched with her daughter's name and the words, "Always loved." She spent hours there, sometimes talking aloud, as if her daughter could still hear her. The town of Dover, too, struggled to move on. The tragedy had unfolded in their own backyards. People had known Derek. Some had brought their cars to him for years. Now, they were grappling with the knowledge that a killer had lived and worked quietly among them. Rebecca had been one of them. And her secret life and tragic death reminded everyone how little we often know about those around us. In February, the town library held a memorial service in her honor. It was standing room only. The community room, where Rebecca had once organized book drives and children's reading hours, was filled with flowers, photographs, and quiet sobs. Her colleague, Ellen Morrison, spoke about their last conversation, a simple goodnight, that neither of them knew would be their final goodbye. Over 300 people came. They came to mourn, to remember, and to reclaim Rebecca's story from the painful headlines. In June 2024, Derek Vaughn was sentenced. The judge, Helen Bradford, had seen many cases in her 23 years on the bench. But she said this one would stay with her. She sentenced Derek to 30 years to life for second-degree murder, plus concurrent sentences for evidence tampering and abuse of a corpse. She said while the killing may not have been planned, his actions afterward showed a disturbing disregard for human dignity and the suffering of those left behind. Liam Vaughn received 12 years. His cooperation spared him a harsher sentence, but not by much. Neither man showed emotion as the sentences were read. Their faces were blank, already preparing for the decades ahead behind prison walls. Detective Carl Henderson retired just 3 months later. In September 2024, it marked the end of his 30-year career. The Thornton case had been his last major investigation. And while he solved it, it didn't feel like a victory. He'd stood at the back of Rebecca's funeral the previous fall, watched as her parents buried their only child, and felt the weight of every month he'd spent chasing leads that seemed to go nowhere. At his retirement party, someone asked what he'd learned after 3 decades in law enforcement. He answered, "I've learned that people are complicated. That victim and perpetrator don't always capture the whole truth, and that the worst crimes often come from moments people can't take back." Dover moved forward the way communities eventually do. But Rebecca Ann Thornton's name was still spoken, her story a reminder that secrets carry weight, and violence leaves scars that time alone can't heal.